Welcome back. It's Connie Sokol, your host and Call to Create. And we are so thrilled to have our guest today. You are going to have to strap in because this man has done everything and he's going to share some tips and tools on how we can do that too in our vision and calling to create. So welcome, Dr. Stacy Taniguchi. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
We are so excited to go in depth. This man has lived such a full life and is inviting us to all do the same thing, especially in our callings to create. So I'm going to give you the official bio, and then we're going to jump right in to finding out how he's done what he's done. Dr. Stacy Taniguchi is a retired professor from Brigham Young University's Marriott School of Business. He's earned his PhD from BYU with a focus in educational leadership and foundations. He is a co-founding partner and senior consultant of a business leadership and family legacy consulting firm called Beta Experiences with other BYU professors. He is also the owner of Kahiltna Visions, a wilderness guiding and outdoor adventure consulting company for the past 35 years. He has an extensive background in mountaineering and international expedition leadership, including notable climbs of Denali, Kilimanjaro, and Everest. He has lived and guided in Alaska for over 25 years, and he specialized in outdoor adventures, hiking, kayaking, and fly fishing excursions. Having studied tort liability law at BYU's J. Reuben Clark Law School, Dr. Taniguchi is sought after for risk management and expert witness consultations regarding outdoor recreational activities and equipment product liability. He is now a retired BYU professor, but was in experiential design programs for MBA students. He and his wife, Luann, have 4 children and 10 grandchildren, and he currently divides his time between Utah, Alaska, and his home state of Hawaii. Already, do you want his life? Yes, we do. All right, we're going to jump in. I am dying to know so many questions. I'm dying to know that here you are, born in Molokai, Hawaii, and Hawaii, I say it right. And then you have parents that are Japanese immigrants. And by your own admission, you were spending your days as a youth sort of surfing every day. How did you go from that to sort of this modern day Indiana Jones, live a full adventurous life and learn from those adventures? What was that thing that sparked that shift?
Well, I think for some of your audience members, they may remember, if they're old enough, that there used to be a weekly pictorial magazine that was pretty popular back in its day called Life magazine.
Yes.
And it was a magazine that our family subscribed to. So every week I looked forward to receiving it in the mail. And there would just be pictures from all around the world of different adventures and things that people had been doing. Most of the time, the pictures were about famous people and things that were happening. But every once in a while, there were just everyday people that were living their life and doing something interesting. And that captured whatever the editors of the magazine wanted to focus on. But in the very back of the magazine was always what they called the picture of the week. And one particular issue, I remember seeing a gentleman that was holding up a piece of paper that looked like it had a bunch of itemized things listed on it. And the caption, if I remember correctly, was he finished his list. And as I was reading the paragraph underneath that, it was talking about how he had decided that he wanted to have a map of the way he would wanted to live his life. And he would list down all the things that he had dreams of doing, things that he wanted to accomplish, places he wanted to go to. And he had finished a list. And I don't even remember how many things he had on the list. I don't even know what he had on the list. But I just thought that was an intriguing idea that, it would be kind of nice to list out some of the things that you want to do in your life. And so as a teenager, I started to do that. And over a period of time, the list grew to be 100 things. And it was more of like waypoints that you're just aware of opportunities that come into your life. And the question becomes, do you take advantage of those opportunities? And I think that was really the turning point for me to realize that the world's pretty big. There's a lot of cool things to see and do. And if you have this list, it gives you a chance to recognize, oh, that's an opportunity to check something off on the list. And so you try to pursue it.
So fantastic. And I love this attitude and this lens of that life is an adventure and there's so much to discover and we can become through that discovery. So here you are, say teenager going into young adulthood. As you started noticing that you started doing these list things, what were some of the things that really caught your attention? Some of these that you have on your list, and if you want to check it out, we'll have the links in the show notes. It's amazing the things that you've accomplished. Some of those are huge, those climbing all those different mountains and being on so many different continents and big life experiences. Were there any of them that you just kind of shied away from at first and that called to you, but you shied away or just thought, I don't know if I can do that?
When I first started the list, and if your audience takes on a task like this, you're going to find out that to start the list probably is kind of easy because you probably have had some dreams that you'd like to do. But it also was mixed in with things that everybody dreams about doing. Like I wanted to finish high school. I wanted to go to college, wanted to buy a car and things like that. So the list had a lot of things that I think everybody thinks about and would probably think about putting on the list. But then after a while, you also realize that there are some things that you would like to see or like to learn to do. And the important thing about people to realize is that these are just lists of things that you're dreaming about that you want to accomplish, but it doesn't mean that your life has been any less significant, or I call it thriving, if you don't finish the list. The object is not to necessarily make sure everything gets done before you pass on. It's really just kind of a way to help you realize, oh, here's an opportunity to do something that I had on the list. And that's really what I have found. We have a tendency in our everyday life to think the opportunities to do things that just seem to be less. Things are just more expensive now and just harder to get to and stuff. And I try to tell people, no, your life is full of opportunities. The main difference is you've got to stop making excuses for why you can't take advantage of that opportunity. And I have learned that having things like on what I call your list to thrive makes you recognize that, oh, that's on my list. How can I make that happen? My attitude has always been, you know what, this is the opportunity and it may never come again. So I have to find a way to make it happen.
That's so true. And I really appreciate that lens. And let's go down this 100 list for those that are listening and thinking about maybe making their own, especially as a creative. There's so many times that their thing that they want seems so big, so out of reach, so impossible. And I love that you are chunking it into the everyday things that matter as well. One of the things that you have 4 rules, I remember, or 5 rules that you have for this list. And one of them is align it with governing values. And that really stood out to me because, like you're saying, it's not just climbing Kilimanjaro. It's how do I create a meaningful life, a life that is well lived, a life that you thrive in. So as you encourage people to do this list, and I'm encouraging our wonderful listeners that are creatives of how they can create this life that is that, I don't even want to use the word balance, but something like that, of that mix and that variety of those everyday meaningful things and want to, fulfill your life things and those big ticket items as well. So can you take us to that feeling of maybe fear? It seems like you don't fear a lot from the things that you've accomplished, but when someone's starting to create this list, and just like you alluded to, there's going to be, I can't afford it. And I don't know how to do it. And but I want to take advantage of the opportunity. How do they step over that line of fear? How do they take that next step and say, I actually can do this?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that in what I call my Choose to Thrive model, which is really based on a lot of the research that I did while I was a professor, is that you do need to recognize and identify and embrace the idea that you do have some governing values. They need to be very clear to you. They need to be defined, and they need to be upfront in your life. You need to live your life with those governing values in mind. I had a very, very good friend who really was the one who taught me this idea, a gentleman by the name of Hiram Smith. He was the founder and the CEO of a company called Franklin Quest that eventually merged with Stephen Covey's group, and they became known as Franklin Covey. He was the one who told me that if you don't live your life in line with your governing or core values, the things that matter to you most. He says you're not going to live a thriving life. You're going to find yourself making decisions that are going to be very disruptive in your life. It's going to make you question, who you are, those kinds of things. So the first thing that I tell people is you've got to identify your governing values. And once you decide what your governing values are, you need to prioritize them, because I have lived my life for a long time, and I have learned that there are times when your governing values come in conflict with each other. And the time to make the decision which value is more important than the other is not at the time when you have to make that decision, like within the next few minutes. You really need to know that this value will always be more important than that value. And so if you find yourself with that challenge, you don't find yourself in a dilemma.
Is there an experience that comes to mind where you had that, where they were competing and you had to make a decision?
Yeah. For example, I don't partake of alcohol. And I've had business meetings where I'm with some very influential people and people who are trying to get to know me and I'm getting to know them. And we're in some social event and they're ordering and, trying to pass out alcoholic beverages. And the question becomes, well, in this moment, do I just go ahead and accept it and, take a sip or two and just be sociable? For some people, that could be a dilemma. But for me, it never has been. It's always been that I just don't partake, and that's the bottom line. And if I lose a friendship or I lose a business deal or whatever, that's just the consequence of living my value.
I think you are spot on, especially so many times you feel like I've got to ride this wave because I don't know when it's going to come again. But I love that you bring the point up of, and I found this for myself as well, and I think most people do, that if it's not aligned with your governing values, the opportunity is not worth taking. And that kind of opportunity will come back around in some other fashion, and generally speaking, in a way that's better for you to be able to still stay true to those values. I know on this list, let's keep going down this list for those that want to try to do this in their lives. I appreciate that you make the point. This isn't a bucket list in terms of, I've got to do this and it's just at all costs, but it's more of a guide to figure out what really matters to me. And this is my reminder. This is right here in a condensed version of what is going to keep me focused on the things that at the end of my life, I'm going to look back and go, I lived the life that I wanted. So you have on there, one of the rules is that you can't take it off. Once you put something on the list, you can't take it off. I want to know why you say that. And then also, have you ever wanted to take something off your list once you had put it on there? So two-part question.
Yeah. The reason why I don't want people taking things off their list is because it forces you to be very thoughtful about what you put on the list. It makes you think, does this really align with my values? Is this something that I really, aspire to do or accomplish? Because the idea here, and I'm glad you mentioned the fact that it's not a bucket list. The bucket list has a connotation that you're doing something in preparation of death. And that's totally opposite of what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get you to live your life to thrive. This is about a living list. And I want people to be very thoughtful about what will that list eventually create for you. Well, one of the questions that I always pose is, would you live your life over and over again for eternity? I borrowed that question from the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche because this was a thought that he had about trying to live a good life. And it's a very insightful question, especially if you can hear what their answer is, because typically people will probably say things like, parts of it I would, parts of it I wouldn't. And I would have to tell them, no, I'm kind of looking for a yes or no. If they tell me no, usually as I question them about it, they'll usually tell me it's because there are bad things that have happened in the past. So what I would suggest to people is I said, well, let's change the mental map of framing that question for you. You can't change the things that have happened in the past. Many of them are important and you should learn lessons from them, but you can't go back and make that a different path. That's already set. Well, how about if you look to your future from wherever you are right now? This is the beginning to define how your life will be, because you do have control of that. You do have a way to set where that path goes. if you think about it that way, then the idea is be thoughtful about how you go down that path. And I have found that on my list, there were things on there that were kind of like, okay, I don't know if that would ever happen. And I'm not sure as I get older, I really want to do that. One, for example, was I wanted to learn to scuba dive and dive in the Great Barrier Reef. Now that seems pretty far fetched. And as I got older, it's like, am I physically capable of doing these kinds of things and whatever? But then the opportunity came along and I thought, oh man, okay, so how do I make this happen? And through a chain of events and doing certain things, I had to go take the lessons, I had to go take the test, and then have the opportunity to go to Australia and have this chance to dive in the Great Barrier Reef. And even though I know that may sound to your audience like, wow, that would be cool or whatever, I have scuba dived and been in places where I've seen even more beautiful places to dive than the Great Barrier Reef. But the idea was I could do it. So one of the things that I think, as you were talking about fear, is this idea of we have spent our life really dedicating it to putting labels. I call them societal layers. That you're a motivational speaker or teacher, or that I'm a professor, I have a PhD, or somebody down the street is the CEO of a company, or someone's a mother. But these are all what we believe society wants to see about us, or society has kind of, in some cases, forced us to go down that road to get that label so that we can go and do some things. The problem with that is underneath all that layer is the real you. Immanuel Kant calls it the sublime nature. Mm-hmm. That it's indescribable, undefinable, but we all need to get a glimpse of it again by peeling off some of these layers, because those layers hide that in it. And what I usually tell people, the sublime nature gives you a sense of who you are. What are your weaknesses? What are your strengths? And if you take the time to reflect on those, it also shows you your potentials. Mm-hmm. That's what we need to discover. And so, as you were saying, sometimes you might be thinking, you know what, to go and scuba dive in the Great Barrier Reef, that sounds dangerous. I don't know if I could do that, but that would be interesting. Well, the question then becomes, what are you capable of doing? But the only way you're going to know that is you have to be in situations where your societal layers are peeled off. And many times, those particular situations are awkward situations where you face risk. We did a consulting job once in Moab, Utah, and we were taking a pharmaceutical company C-suite of executives down a canyon. Their environment and focus was really around the pharmaceutical world, their offices. Now, all of a sudden, they're in this totally different environment. And the CEO is coming to the first rappel. It's a 100-foot rappel down a dark hole. And he's standing on the edge of this cliff. We're telling him to go backwards over this on the rope and get to the bottom. And he's looking at us like, are you crazy? I can't do this. Eventually he does this, but it's very emotional for him. And in fact, all of his managers are standing watching him because he's going to be the first one to go down. Mm-hmm. And he's literally crying as he's taking a step back. It changed their whole relationship. They and he saw a glimpse of his sublime nature. And when it was all done and we processed it, he came up to us later and he says, guys, I just want you to know, next to the marriage to my wife and the birth of my kids, this was the most meaningful thing in my life that I've learned so much about me. And we heard from his colleagues later that he had become a changed person. And that moment, something very difficult, very fearful for him, it peeled off those layers. I call it sublimation. You go through this process of sublimation and you get a glimpse of your sublime nature. That can change your whole world.
Right. And that awareness, that awakening almost, that makes all things possible. If you can do this, then what else is possible? And I can see where it can shift you, where it changes the paradigm of what is possible for you and your life. And like you said, impacting those around you. And I was thinking as you were talking, such a powerful example. Sometimes we look at these things as sort of those soft skills of like, oh, we're going to go on this adventure and we're going to, it's going to be kumbaya and it's going to be great. And then we go back to the office and get things done. But I love that you bring up this point that, and I think that's what creatives feel instinctively and would love for people to validate more, is that this experiential way of living, this creative expression and doing and becoming, this is a pivotal piece of our lives. And it's not just an afterthought or something we should do on a Saturday, that this is really something that needs to weave through our lives to keep, like you said, shedding those layers and still revealing who we are and flourishing who we are. So it begs the question for me, how much have you found that it's sort of what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Is it putting things on your list and then it brings up these opportunities? Or is it opportunities that bring up ideas for them to put on your list?
I think it's a little bit of both. I tell people, think on the accomplishments you've already done in your life. For many people, they've done some pretty awesome things. Mm-hmm. And I tell them, put that on your list. The neat thing is you can check it off at the same time. But what it does is it helps you to recognize, I have done some pretty incredible things. College wasn't easy, but I got through it. Or getting the position that I'm in took a lot of effort and time, but I did it. And I think it helps people to understand that, yeah, you can do hard things, or at least what looked like it might have been hard to begin with. You finished it and you've got it. And to do that, I think helps people to realize, yeah, I do have that potential. I go back east and I speak to college campuses about this Choose to Thrive model. And I had a professor that came up to me once after the presentation. And she said, Stacy, you were here 2 years ago. I took your message to heart. I created my list, but I kind of put the list aside. And then the pandemic hit. And she says, I was just thinking, this is terrible. I'm just stuck at home and whatever. Anyway, she said, I pulled the list out, looked at it, and I said, you know what? I should try to do some of these things. And one of them was to learn to play the guitar so that she was good enough to play in front of people. And so she ended up looking for ways to learn to play the guitar. Now, she's a professor on a college campus. There were music classes. So she said, I spent those 2 years learning to play the guitar. And she said this last summer, in my hometown, she said there was a park, and in the park at lunchtime, there's a stage where people can go and sign up for 10-minute blocks to do whatever they want to do. And there's people that come and eat their lunch in the park, families that come and play, whatever. And she said, I signed up for a 10-minute block. I played 2 songs and sang. And she said, it wasn't great, but she says, a lot better than it was a couple of years ago. And as she finished, she says, everybody in the park stood up and clapped. And as she was walking off the stage, she says, that was such a cool feeling to realize that I had brought joy to people, and it was great. But she says, I didn't really know what that was until she went home, pulled out the list, and was putting the check mark next to that item. And she said, you know what, Stacy? That's what it feels like to thrive. And she said that was such a great feeling that I wanted it again. She says, you need to make sure that your audience knows that they've got to live the things on their list. And that's what will keep them going, help them to feel that they're capable of doing these things. And I've adopted that suggestion to tell people, just creating the list is not thriving. Yes. You have to live the things on your list. You have to go and pursue those things. And in some cases, it's not just that opportunities come along, that you pursue something that hopefully opens the door for you.
That's so beautiful how you shared that. And it is really true. Man, it took me back to, I do Studio 5 and they had us do this segment thing on Never Have I Ever. And I'd always wanted to sing with a big band, but it was just too embarrassing. And then it was months later and I'd forgotten I didn't do, I was going to do all these voice lessons and didn't. And I think there's such a power in just doing it, not waiting for it to be perfect, not waiting for it. Just like she said, it wasn't great. Like it was, better than it was 2 years ago, but I wasn't great, but it was such a powerful experience experience, I go back to what you just shared about that man crying. I got off the stage and I was seriously weeping. There's something cathartic about it. It just opens you up to this space that, as you've mentioned, we kind of tamped down on the daily to be responsible and get things functional and get them done. So as we're talking about this and people who are listening, I would love to know for you personally, you've done these 100 things. They're so varied. They're amazing. I know it's the quintessential awful question of what has been one that has been really a standout to you. And it may not have been something of, okay, climbing Kilimanjaro, but one that maybe was unexpected for you, one that was powerful and it changed you, but maybe in an unexpected way. Does anything come to mind to you in that 100 list?
It's a common question that I get asked. I think the number one thing is getting married to my wife. That changed my life. I mean, it really did in multiple ways. And then the other cool thing about this is that when you take advantage of one of these things on your list, you begin to find out it also opens doors to other opportunities and other things that will happen. And so, getting married to my wife, who is so awesome because a lot of the things that I've done with her permission to go do it. Not that she was super excited that I was going to go climb Everest, but she says, I know that's on your list. I know this is a passion of yours. She says, you may never have this opportunity again. You've got to go and you've got to do it. But the thing that I've noticed is that from our marriage, we have 4 kids and they're awesome kids. I've done many things with my children, but the one thing that I feel like was an opportunity that came from that marriage was to climb Denali with my son, my oldest son. He always wanted to, because every summer I was guiding on Denali, and he always would say, I want to go with Dad. And my wife would say, no, you're not going to go do something dangerous like that. But there was a point where she and I both recognized that our kids were really doing well. I mean, they weren't perfect kids. They were normal like everybody else, but they were doing well in school, towing the line. And my wife felt like I really want to keep encouraging them to live their life in the way that they've been doing. And so she told them, she says, if you graduate from high school successfully, she says, Dad and I want to help you live a dream that you've had. So we'll, within our means, support you after you graduate to go pursue something that you'd love to do. And our oldest son knew right away what he wanted to do. And he goes, well, Mom, I want to climb Denali with Dad. And she realized, I just painted myself in a corner. But I looked at her and I said, this is your idea. This is something that, we're offering the kids. And she said, well, then I want you to prepare him for that. He was a junior in high school at the time. Prepare him to climb that. And she says, and when you climb it, you're not guiding other people. You pay attention to our son. So the summer that he graduated, he and I, with another guide and his son, because we were close friends, we went and climbed Denali together. And that solidified our relationship in more ways than one. Talk about sublimation. I mean, we weren't dad and son anymore. We were partners in this adventure. I mean, there were times when, the rope was the only thing that was keeping us safe. But my point being was this all came about because on my list was I wanted to get married. I didn't even have on the list that I wanted to have children. It was just, I want to get married. And that ended up having this opportunity to, spend time with my son and all of my kids.
Wow. And talk about living your list. I'm sure people listening are thinking the same thing. I'm thinking, ooh, I want to talk to my kids about something like that. And what a purposeful kind of connection and experience to have this thing that is so tied to their desires, their dreams, and you supporting that and then saying, I can help you with that. And even if we can't specifically help with everything to do with their dream, being willing to support that and saying, I want to help you with your living list as well. What a connector for family members and especially for parents and kids. Absolutely love this. I wish we had more time to talk. I would love to know more about all the ins and outs of how you made this into a business and how this all worked for you. But just to wrap up, let's close up with a couple of quick questions. And one of them being, you went on to be a BYU professor and now turn back and do this in almost a payback, sharing this with these younger kids of getting them started, just like your son, and saying, let's get started on your list now and move forward on it now. So you have that lens. How has that changed you, seeing other people, inspiring them to do their lists and hearing their stories? How has this changed you?
I have found that since I've been talking to people about this choose to thrive idea, this model, people have come to me and have said some pretty kind of eye-opening things. I gave this to a corporate group once, and a gentleman comes up to me afterwards and he says, "You know what, Stacy, I don't usually come to these keynote addresses or what, but I just felt like I needed to come to this one." And he looked at me straight in the eye and says, "You saved my life today." And I kind of was taken aback, and I was thinking like, oh my gosh. And what really got me thinking that I need to talk about this idea was when I was teaching at BYU. I was teaching this class, and we had a tragic accident. Some of your audience members might remember this, but we were in the Tanner building at the BYU campus. I was teaching a class, and I had just released the class. We were done, and my students came in afterwards and they said, Dr. Taniguchi, a girl just jumped off the fourth floor. She committed suicide. And it was tragic. I mean, it just disrupted everything on campus, especially in the business school. And about a week later, a student comes up to me. She goes, Dr. T, I knew that she was struggling. She says, if she was in your class this semester, learning about the things that you're teaching, which was really about thriving, she says, I don't think she would have jumped. I really don't think so. It was at that moment, it was kind of like the aha moment that, wow, I need to get this message out. I need to get people to understand that you can take control of your life right now. Doesn't matter how old you are, and find a way to discover that sublime nature of yourself and realize that you have the potential to do amazing things in your life that will make your life one in which, and I go back to the question, if given the opportunity, I would come back and live my life over and over and over again for eternity. Not because you would have the opportunity to just come back and enjoy it, but you could come back and teach those who are still yet to come and teach them that this is how you live your life. And I tell people, it's not rocket science. It doesn't cost you a lot of money to make the list. You can be doing these things. And then all of a sudden, what you're going to find out is your life is full of opportunities. Just stop making excuses why you can't take advantage of it. And the reason why you won't make excuses is because, doggone it, that's on my list. If I don't take advantage of it now, that's going to be something that I'm going to skip over and I may never check it off.
Exactly. I so appreciate those points that you've made. This is so inspiring. And I believe that the listeners are feeling that same way of, we can, especially as creatives, we can get down in the trenches and it's hard to see the vision of keeping going or why they should, or what's the purpose in it, or how can I feel more fulfilled in what I'm doing? Because I'm going through a lot of the hard spots. And I so appreciate how you've shared this living list, and that as you, at least like you said, just put the time and energy just to sit, ponder, pray, think about what does Heavenly Father want from you and what do you want from you, and then amalgamate that and put that into that list, that it just adds that joie de vivre. It adds that spark, that thing of, I'm not just here to get up and pay the bills and do the things, that this vision has always been higher and I get to participate in it the way that I want to and the way that Lord will open up doors for me, which he is so happy to do. Love all these beautiful things that you have shared with us today. I know listeners are going to want to connect with you. Dr. Taniguchi, what's the best way for them to do that?
Our consulting company is called Beta Experiences. We have a website. It's Beta EXP, BETAEXP.com. And they can just visit the website, and there's ways that they can link up. We do a bunch of different stuff. I mean, consulting is our main focus, but We do workshops, we do presentations, we do adventures. The main difference between what we do and probably what other consulting companies do is we take our clients out in environments that they're not used to. So we get them out of the office. It's very experiential. But anyway, yeah, you visit our website and you can definitely get a hold of us through that website.
I love it. And it's just such a great bookend to, I think about you as a teenager surfing and having no idea that this whole full life was ahead of you, but you've done it intentionally and you've done the work and you put the time, energy, and effort into creating this life that is so rewarding and fulfilling and such a discovery process. And I think that's the big takeaway today is being called to create can be called to create a beautiful, fulfilling, flourishing life. And we don't have to wait for the right circumstance or the right money or the right, people, that we can put that intention first and take it to Heavenly Father and then let those things start to unfold. Thank you so much for being with us today. This was eye-opening and inspiring.
Well, thank you for having me.
So wonderful. And if you want more of these wonderful interviews, we have Jenny Doan, we have Stephen Sharp Nelson from the Piano Guys, we have Anthony Sweat. We have so many wonderful people who are so generous with their life wisdom and experiences in helping you to be able to do your journey of being called to create.